So how many cheat meals should you really have in a given week? Well, we're going to investigate it a little bit. There's a cool study that just came out that took a look at subjects that were restricting their calories 5 days out of the week and then increasing their calories in cheat meal fashion 2 days out of the week. Results are pretty interesting. We'll get into the details in just a minute, but I'm a big meal timing manipulation person. Okay, I come from the school of thought that you're going to get more benefit out of manipulating the timing of your meals, i.e. intermittent fasting, i.e. specific periods of caloric restriction, et cetera, instead of just continuously reducing calories. Okay, if you manipulate the timing, you get hormonal benefits. You get different cascading effects. That's why intermittent fasting is so effective, because yes, at the end of the day, you're still restricting calories, but it's the hormonal response that occurs from the restriction of calories that I really get excited about. So this study is really cool. Now, before I get into this study, I have talked about what's called the Matador study before. Now, the Matador study takes a look at subjects that would diet for 2 weeks and then come off of their diet for 2 weeks, then diet for 2 weeks, come off of their diet for 2 weeks over the course of like 8 weeks or something. Now, that Matador study found that subjects that did do 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, actually lost more fat than the group that continuously dieted. Well, that's pretty cool, but what if we start looking at it at a smaller scale? Okay, we look at it, instead of going 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, what if we look at more frequent cheat meals or more frequent refeeds, like happening every weekend? Well, that's what this study looks at. Now, before I get into that too, I have to say, full disclaimer, one cheat meal is not enough to boost your metabolism. There's a study in the journal Metabolism that demonstrated that when you have one single cheat meal, you usually only get a metabolic increase of like 3 to 10% for roughly 24 hours. So you're not boosting your metabolism all that much, usually not enough to offset the calories you took in from said cheat meal. For example, if you cheat and you have 500 calories worth of pizza, and you have a 10% increase in your metabolism for 24 hours, you're lucky if you're burning an extra 200 calories from that cheat meal. You're still at a net positive of 300 calories, so that cheat meal didn't do you a whole lot of good. Studies have shown that you really have to be refeeding for an extended period of time, for at least a couple of days, to get that solid benefit. And most of the refeeds have to come from carbohydrates. However, there are some exceptions. Hey, I do want to make sure you hit that red subscribe button, if you don't mind. And then also hit that little bell icon. That way you can turn on notifications so you never ever miss a beat. And speaking of cheat meals, after you watch this video, check out Fat Snacks down below in the description. If you want to have yourself a little cheat that's not technically a cheat, and you want to stay within a low carb realm or anything like that, check out Fat Snacks. They are by far my favorite low carb cookie. Highly, highly recommend them. And a special link, special pricing for those of you that watch my videos. So check them out down below in the description. Big supporter of this channel. Check them out after you watch this video. Okay, so this new study was published in the Journal of Functional Morphology and Kinesiology. And it was cool because it took a look at subjects that were already somewhat lean, somewhat in shape individuals, and it put them into two groups. One group did continuous caloric restriction. So they reduced their calories by 25% day over day. They just stayed at a nice calorie deficit. The other group went 5 days of a caloric deficit at 35%, and then 2 days on the weekends or something like that, right, of bringing their calories back up to maintenance. So in essence, they were doing intermittent caloric restriction, just like intermittent fasting, except intermittent caloric restriction. It's still just manipulating the timing. So what they did is they compared these two groups and they had them do the exact same workout, pretty intense periodization. They had them eat the same amount of protein, 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So both groups ate the same amount of protein. The only difference was that the one group on their refeed days would consume extra calories by way of carbohydrates only. That's kind of the caveat. They were really measuring with carbohydrates because they wanted to get a stronger cheat meal sort of leptin response. Well, here's the results, pretty fascinating. When it came down to body mass, the refeed group lost 3.2 kilograms and the continuous group lost 3.6 kilograms. Well, if you stop right there, you're going to say, oh, the continuous group lost more weight. That's a better way to lose body weight. Well, it's a better way to lose body weight, but when you actually look at the fat mass, it gets more interesting. The refeed group lost 2.8 kilograms of fat mass, whereas the control group lost 2.3 kilograms of fat mass. Negligible difference, but still more fat loss coming from the refeed group, the group that had cheat meals or had more carbs on the weekends, right? Pretty wild. Then we look at fat-free mass. So fat-free mass reduction in the refeed group was 0.4 kilograms, and in the control group was 1.4 kilograms, meaning The control group, the group that continuously kept their calories low, lost a lot more muscle. That's what fat-free mass is, mainly muscle. Then they looked at dry fat-free mass, which is muscle that's basically in its dry weight, and an even bigger difference. 0.2 kilograms lost in the refeed group versus 1.9 kilograms lost in the control group. All right, we're getting some interesting stuff here. And lastly, the resting metabolic rate. The refeeding group lost basically their metabolic rate decreased by 38 calories, and the control group reduced by 78. So that means that their metabolism got slower. So the refeed group didn't slow down their metabolism nearly as much. Pretty darn cool. So preservation of muscle, a lot more overall fat loss in the grand scheme of things, and just a better outcome, probably long-term for the metabolism. Now, why is this occurring? And I know a lot of people that watch my channel are low carb, and you might be keto, and you might be intermittent fasting, and so you might be thrown off by the whole carb thing, but it still applies just in the grand scheme of things in terms of just the timing system. Why did this occur? Well, the biggest piece that we have to look at is they had 2 days consecutively of not being in a deficit. Okay, now here's where I'm going to get kind of granular with things, and it gets kind of weird, but it makes sense, right? Okay, 2 days of not being in a deficit switches the hormonal system entirely. Okay, being in a deficit versus not being in a deficit is very black and white as far as the hormonal response and enzymatic response within your body, and even gene expression. Once you cross that line and you're no longer in a deficit, it resets specific things, especially for a couple of days. So the group that consistently was reducing calories and consistently kept it low, they never had a break of being in a deficit. So they were constantly in this specific phase of hormone signaling, whereas the other group that took 2 days of carbohydrate inflection, even though it wasn't a significant amount, they were able to stop that hormonal signaling, trigger a different cascade of hormone signaling that allowed them to preserve muscle and allowed them to activate different mechanisms within the body. That's one piece. Now the other piece is there was a pretty big carbohydrate load difference in the group that ate on the weekends or ate for those 2 days. More carbohydrates, meaning more muscle glycogen, which probably resulted in increased workout performance. Not to say that the increase in workout performance really burned that many more calories, but again, trickle-down hormonal effect. Were they potentially able to push it harder with their workouts? If so, then the metabolic and biochemical response in their body would be more significant. Not because they burned 16 more calories during their workout, that's negligible, but the afterburn effect and what they're actually doing in their metabolism. The other piece is insulin does preserve muscle. Now, please pay attention to this. If you're doing keto, this is irrelevant. Okay, because during keto, you can be in a deficit and preserve muscle because the ketone, beta-hydroxybutyrate, is very muscle sparing. It prevents leucine oxidation. Okay, so that doesn't apply. But in this case, since they were not keto, the fact that they had a bigger spike in insulin on the weekends, that is implying that they're going to be able to preserve muscle mass just by various studies. So that helped them alone. Therefore, maintaining muscle allowed them to increase their resting metabolic rate, which allowed them to burn more fat and coincidentally keep more muscle in the process. So that's why that process works. So what does this look like in a practical form for you? I would argue that you are probably better off to do a period like this where you have 2 or 3 days off of your diet, followed by more aggressive weight loss techniques and caloric restriction during other days. And I feel this way with fasting too. I'm always a fan of not fasting every day because fasting every day falls into the same category as caloric restriction day over day over day. It's no different other than the structure of your meal spacing. At the end of the day, the big macro picture, you're still restricting calories the same way. Spontaneous and sporadic caloric reduction, as well as spontaneous and sporadic caloric surplus or maintenance, is going to be what you need to keep the hormonal signaling proper. So this 5 days of intermittent caloric restriction is no different than intermittent fasting. It's just caloric restriction instead. I hope that makes sense. Anyhow, as always, please do keep it locked in here on my channel, and I hope that you learned something today, that having more frequent little breaks with your diet could actually be very, very powerful. I'll see you soon.